Good morning to the people of Guam. We are still on recess pending we reach a quorum. Thank you. Good morning, my colleagues. The Committee of the Whole is called to order. Reminder, number one, we passed the motion that you have 5 minutes on any of your amendments. That's number one. Number two, my colleagues, if you don't raise your hand and the chair does not recognize you, don't start speaking, because I'll rule you out of order. That's number two. And we should be able to begin. Well, number three would be Chapter 2, Guam Commission for Educator Certification. We don't have any amendments. That is closed. We are now at Chapter 3, Guam Memorial Hospital Authority. If I'm correct, we do have an amendment there. And that is with the speaker. Speaker, you have, it's SB 55 TMT L20, page 34, or let me get my pages correct here first. It should be L19. No, L20 P34. This is the continuing appropriation authorization for Guam Memorial. Madam Speaker. And I believe my colleagues will be seeing quite a few of that for other agencies that will need it. Madam Speaker?
Yes, thank you. This is a motion to amend Section 4, or to add a Section 4 to the bill to read on page 34, line 21, to read continuing appropriation authorization, notwithstanding any other provision of law, the unexpended balance of funds appropriated to the Guam Memorial Hospital in Public Law 35-99 shall not lapse and shall continue to be available until fully expended.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Senator Duenas.
Mr. Chairman, I'm in full support of this amendment, and I'm glad that we will continue to allow for continuing appropriation. And the reason why is because we've taken the heavy responsibility of being very, very, very realistic in this budget in terms of revenues. And so I don't want us going forward, to be accused of not allowing for all of the tools available for the departments, agencies, and whatever other instrumentalities going forward to be able to manage. I've seen, some of the reports alluding to, this body and what our priorities are. I think we've done two things. One is we've said our priority is to make sure that we're responsible to the people of Guam, that we put forward a budget that's realistic, conservative, and something that the people can count on in this environment, our government and our services that can be counted on. The second is that the flexibility that we're giving also is going to allow, the governor to use resources to be able to assist these agencies. And having continuing appropriations means, that they can stay within their budgets, but they have the flexibility of that revenue carrying over and that authority carrying over. And I just think that that's a responsible thing to do. In other circumstances, it probably wouldn't be, because you wouldn't want to give that much flexibility simply because you want them to live within whatever has been passed that fiscal year. I've seen that in the past to where that has been disallowed. But I think that in this instance, where we're being responsible in terms of adopting the numbers, but we're also given the flexibility. So I appreciate this amendment and others that may be forthcoming. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Duenas. Does anyone else like to speak? Senator Tello?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and good morning, colleagues. I have no objection to this amendment, but I would like to know what is that amount in lapses?
Mr. Guerrero?
I believe the amendment is referring to FY21 appropriation, so since FY21 is still in progress, I will not know what the lapses will be until the end of the fiscal year.
Have you asked the agency, the department?
Pardon?
I believe during the public hearing, there might have been a question with regards to that. Did you happen to ask the agency when you met the agency, Guam Memorial Hospital, how much lapses that they may have?
No, Senator, I don't think we asked the departments that kind of question because they wouldn't know it until the end of the fiscal year, because you still have a lot of encumbrances. And I believe when we had their public hearing, they had like about 2.5 months worth of operation to go. So between the time of their budget hearing and the time of the end of the fiscal year, the available balances could change tremendously.
So Steve, you're saying that you don't ask the agencies if they have any unexpended revenues that are available at all, that they have not utilized within FY21?
What we do, Senator, is we look into the system and find out where they are and how they're doing and what they spent. That's what we're doing. But in terms of determining what the lapses are at the end of the fiscal year, I cannot tell you that.
Did you ask?
No, I didn't ask because I know they
Okay,
couldn't
thank you.
tell me.
Thank you, Steve.
Thank you, Senator Tello. And for my colleagues, I did ask. And they specifically told me they don't know. But if there is a continuing appropriation, they would appreciate it so that by the end of the year, whatever they do have, they'll have the flexibility to use it. And I believe that's why the Speaker has proposed this amendment.
Mr. Chair, since you brought that up, how about last year? At the end of FY20, was there any questioning on how much, because now they would know how much lapses they had. Do you know what it was in FY20?
No, we don't have that right now off the bat. But we can get that information. All
Yeah, I
right?
appreciate it. Thank
All
you.
right. Does anyone else like to speak to this amendment? Senator Brown.
I won't be very long, Mr. Chair. I have no objection to the proposed amendment, but it would be helpful, and I understand you had relayed that I'm surprised the Guam Memorial Hospital doesn't know to provide an answer to the budget chair in terms of what their lapses are or anticipate it would be. But is there a way, certainly, we can request, at the end of this fiscal year that's ending shortly to get that information? I think publicly it would be good to know what money lapsed at GMH.
Yes.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Also for 2020. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
All right, thank you. Does anyone else like to speak on the amendment? There being none, are there any objection to this amendment? I see no hands. Amendment passes. Madam Speaker, you have another one, and if I'm correct, it's on page 42. And it's also a continuing appropriation for Guam Behavioral.
I think there should be one more for, on page 40, or is this page number wrong? For public health?
Madam Speaker, for your agency.
It's labeled page 40, but I think
It's
that's
page
the
40?
wrong page number, right? Or is it page 40, the public health one?
My colleagues, just to advise you that it'll be public health, behavioral, and DISIT would be getting a continuing appropriation amendment.
Yeah. This one. It says page 40 up on top? Yeah, that's the one, public
Yes.
health.
We did this one as expended, authorization outstanding, public health social, 30.
Madam Speaker, We are now on page 42. If I'm correct, the one on page 40 was already entertained?
That's correct.
All right.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So on page 40, line 10, this is a motion to add a new section 7 to the bill, to part 3 of chapter 3, to read, notwithstanding any other provision of law, the unexpended balance of funds appropriated to the Guam Behavioral Health and Wellness Center in Public Law 35-99 shall not lapse and shall continue to be available until fully expended. So, of course, that's the FY21 budget.
All right, thank you. Does anyone would like to speak to that amendment? There being none, are there any objection? There are none. Motion passes. Madam Speaker, you have now page 43.
Yes, thank you. This is same amendment to add another section of this chapter, this section, this part, and this chapter for Guam Behavioral Health for a continuing appropriation for DISIT.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Does anyone would like to speak to that motion? There being none, any objection? I see none. Motion passes. My colleagues, we have completed chapter 3. Chapter 3 is now closed. We are now moving to chapter 4. Yes, ma'am. All right, we'll check real quick before page 34, right? That's the Guam Memorial, that's the reference to the pay? The nurse pay? If I'm correct, I think we did yesterday. Yes, and it passed, ma'am. And it passed. It's in. All right? Yes, okay. So, chapter 3 is closed. We are now on chapter 4, which is Unified Judiciary. Do we have any amendments? We have no amendments posted. Chapter 4 is now closed. We are now moving to chapter 5, Executive Branch. How many amendments? We have several amendments. Take a quick recess so I can get it in order, and then I can call the author of the amendments. All right, my colleagues. Committee of the Whole is called back to order. I would recognize first Senator Dueñas, sir.
Sidus Masi, Mr. Chairman, I know that it's been weighing heavily on many of us, I'm sure, particularly those in this hall who have served or are currently serving. I request at this time that we rise for a moment of silence in recognition of our brave soldiers who lost their lives in Afghanistan, protecting our freedom, and also evacuating our American citizens and those who have helped us in the fight for freedom. Sidus Masi.
Thank you, Senator Dueñas. We'll have a moment of silence.
Sidus Masi, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Dueñas. My colleagues, we're now on Chapter 5. We'll begin with page 56. That's the sequence I have, my colleagues, so let's move to page 56, and that is with Senator Tello.
Sijus Masi, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, I think we start on the one that says line 20, page 56. Because the page 13 actually really begins on line 20 as well. So what my amendment does is just first appropriate to the Guam claims, and then the second amendment basically is allows for the unexpended balance of the Claims Act. That would be next after.
Understood, but,
Okay.
but your line 20,
Yes.
that issue on the appropriation would be on the miscellaneous appropriation, Chapter 11, when you can address that, not at
So
this point.
it doesn't go here?
It wouldn't go here. That's the advice I've got. It would go in Chapter 11, a miscellaneous appropriation.
Can I ask legal? They're here, they just arrived now? They just arrived legal? I was
Yes.
trying to find them earlier.
We'll ask legal,
Okay.
but colleagues, reminder, don't speak out of turn, okay? Senator Tello, you have the floor. We will
Okay.
recess and ask legal.
you.
Thank you. The committee of the whole is back in order. We will proceed, my colleagues, with, I'm correct, Senator Tello, you wanted to go with line 20 first, page 56 before 13. Am I correct?
Yes, sir. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
All right, then we'll proceed in that order, but just remind my colleagues, we're on line 20, then we're going to go back to line 13 to get the sequence and the flow. All right, Senator Tello, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for the time to allow legal to render an opinion. And it basically is the placement of this amendment in this section. And this section, Mr. Chair, is Guam Claims Fund under DOA. And if everybody remembers, we recently passed legislation. It was Public Law 35111 in the last legislature. After almost 30 years of the amount of government claims for liability was set at $250,000 for almost 3 decades. And it was the body of the 35th Guam Legislature that recognized that, after time, 30 years, inflation and many of these claims, I mean, nowadays, to even go to a doctor's office or to replace anything that's been damaged has significantly gone up. So this body had increased that amount to $500,000. And, though at least the liability is like 500, 300. Then, Mr. Chair, every year this body, the legislature, appropriates money for the Guam Claims Act Fund to fund those claims that come in. Unfortunately, the way it rolls is that in the event that the balance is ended, or there's no money in the fund anymore, and there's still people waiting to be paid for a claim that was awarded to them, they would have to wait until this body appropriates it again during budget time. That's usually the only time Guam claims funds are replenished. So I was kind of surprised, Mr. Chair, because even though it had gone up in liability to $500,000, $300,000, that this year the appropriation was only $150,000. In prior legislations, it's always been $250,000, actually. You go back last year, it was $250,000. The year before, $250,000, et cetera. But for some reason this year, especially a year when the Claims Act was pushed up to $500,000 after 30 years, that we go down in the amount that's being appropriated to the Guam Claims Act Fund. This is money that's awarded to individuals who've been hurt by the government of Guam, whether in a car accident or through any type of wrongdoing or injustice that was done to our people by the government. So, Mr. Chair, I had the opportunity to receive this information through the Speaker's office, who's the oversight chair of the Attorney General's office. And I've got some information here that says, it was from the Attorney General's office, Stephanie Mendiola, about pending claims. It says we currently have 5 open claims totaling $6,827,011. 2 million of that total is attributed to just one claim alone. All other prior claims resolved, none are pending payment. So also, I asked for the information from DOA, who oversees that account. And the current balance in the Guam Claims Fund, right now, the current balance is only $186,283.87. That's all that's in this account currently. So, Mr. Chair, what my amendment does is at least, considering what we've been doing for the last budget hearings, budget bills, by at least appropriating the limit of liability which is 500,000 this year. Okay.
Your
yeah.
time's up. 5 minutes
Okay,
is
Mr.
up,
Chair.
okay?
So that's what my amendment does. It just takes it up to 500,000 by appropriating
All right.
350 to the business privilege tax savings for fiscal
Thank-
year.
Senator
Thank you.
Tello, time's up.
I'm sorry, I couldn't
Thank
see
you.
the clock to try and get my
Please.
last 30 seconds.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Senator Tello, I think OAB would like to respond to your comment in reference to Y150, and you can get some information, so
Thank
you
you.
don't assume anything.
Okay.
Steve? In reference to Y150.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just to give you some history and numbers, in FY 2019, total expenditures for the Guam Government Claim Fund is 104. We appropriated 250,000. In FY 2020, total expenditure in the Government Claim Fund was 57,000. We appropriated 250,000. In FY 2021, the current expenditure in the Government Claim Fund is only 63,000, and we appropriate, I believe, 150,000 or 250,000. So that's why the amount of 150,000, we are trying to figure out, if this is a sufficient amount, but this is also the amount that was being claimed by the executive branch. So that's why we are reflecting the 150,000 in the 2022 budget.
Thank you, Mr. Guerrero. So that answers that. Does anyone like to speak to this amendment? Senator Clint?
I just want to make sure I'm looking at the correct amendment. Could you tell me what amendment?
It's on the SB 55 TTTL20, page 56. The appropriation of 350,000.
Sure. Could the author explain what fund this is coming from?
Sure, absolutely, Mr. Chair.
Do you yield to that question?
Absolutely, Mr. Chair. Sorry
Thank
about
you,
that.
Senator Tello.
Mr. Chair, Public Law 36-9 was passed, it was Bill 40, passed to allow for refinancing of the BBT bond. And during that time, the bond was sold, and in the bill, it said that any savings from that refinancing, first $5 million would go to Department of Public Health and Social Services, the first $5 million. We were told that the savings from that refinancing for FY21 so far, it's $6.1 million. That's what I was told by OFB, 6.1 million. So if you minus the $5 million for Department of Public Health and Social Services, that's part of the legislation on the refinancing of the bond, what's left over is $1.1 million. So this amendment is only asking for $350,000 to pay those individuals who've been wronged by the government of Guam, and to recover any cost for them medically or any kind of property damage that was done to the people from the government of Guam. So that's where that funding comes from.
Thank you, Senator Clint. Does that suffice the answer?
I'm sorry, could OFB explain if there's money available?
As Senator Tadiwi said, there is a balance of the initial savings of 1.1 million from the refunding of the BBT in FY21 that was realized, and then by the same public law, it allotted 5 million of that $6.1 million to go to public health. So the remaining balance as of today is approximately $1.1 million.
Senator Clint?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yes, just one more thing I'd like to point out. So the money is coming from these savings, but there's no funding source or account identified specifically. Where will the funds come from?
I believe, Senator, the savings would be reflected in the general fund.
Senator Clint?
This amendment doesn't appropriate from the general fund.
I would assume that's where the deposit of the savings was made, so therefore, to my knowledge, yes, it would be coming from the general fund.
Senator Clint, do you have any additional information that you may want to share that OAB is claiming that there's a safe assumption it'll come from the general fund? If not, we'll just move along.
No, what I'm pointing out here is that it identifies that there are savings from the BPT fiscal year ending 30/2021. But what fund are those savings in? My understanding is OFB said it's in the general fund.
Senator, it is my understanding that the fund source to pay the BBT debt service is coming from the general fund. So I believe that any type of refunding on the BBT, because it's funded out of the general fund, I believe will be revert back to the general fund. I mean, that's what I'm thinking.
So what I'm getting at here is this amendment should be appropriating from the general fund.
It is appropriating from the general fund, but not against FY22 revenues, just to be clear, because the savings was the savings in FY21 refunding.
So my question is, should the language identify that it's from the general fund? Because right now the language doesn't identify a fund, it identifies cash, but what fund is it coming from? So it has to be appropriated from a fund.
If it would make it clear, at least in the intent of the amendment, I would suggest that maybe right after the dollar amount of $350,000, you put is appropriated from the general fund, and identify the business purpose tax as the source of savings.
All right, Senator Clint? In other words, there needs an amendment. That's basically what it comes down to.
Okay, thank you.
All right? Thank you, Senator Clint. Before I ask anybody else, I'm gonna address, there's a good question of your amendment may have some problems because there's no funding source, and then maybe you may want to amend your amendment to add the source of funding for your amendment. That's all.
Sure, Mr. Chair, if you give me a
All right,
minute,
so-
if need be, I'll look to legal and ask them if it needs to be
All
in
right.
that area.
So
Okay?
quick recess. Thank
Sure.
you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
committee of the whole is called to order. I'd like to recognize Senator Tello first.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, I'd like to withdraw my amendment for purposes of introducing another one, a revised one.
Yes, Senator Tello. Are there any objection to the withdrawal of the amendment? There being none, so ordered. Senator Tello, you still have the floor.
Sidus Masi, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, this is now line 20, still page 56. I believe it should be R, if it's uploaded already. Yes, it is.
Yes.
Okay. And colleagues, what I've done here was, in consideration of this same pot of funding or this, savings from the refinancing, and talking with some other colleagues, I think, Mr. Chair, for the sake of compromise, I'm resubmitting this amendment to show, instead of what was asked for before, it will be $232,458, and is appropriated from the general fund, specifically the business privilege tax savings. I incorporated the general fund as recommended by one of my colleagues to also be incorporated. Other than that, Mr. Chair, the amount and incorporating from the general fund specifically is the only change I made. And the amendment pretty much is the same throughout. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
All right, thank you, Senator Tello. Does anyone would like to speak to this amendment? If none, are there any objections? Madam Speaker.
Thanks. I have no objection to this amendment that the Government Claims Fund
She's going to give it to me. Yeah, she did.
be increased with this savings. This is from savings from FY2021. And I know I had asked OFB a couple days ago if there were any monies in here, and they said that they had incorporated it all into the budget. But I asked again this morning after seeing all these amendments, and they say now that they had called Gita and discovered that there's now money savings from FY21. But I want to just confirm, Mr. Chair, that the savings from FY2022, which were predicted to be much greater, have those been spent in our budget here?
Mr. Guerrero.
Yes, Speaker. Let me just go back.
And
Oh, go ahead.
that's all. Yeah, and the, at the time when we were passing that bill to refinance the BPT bonds, Gita had predicted a $5 million savings in FY21, but we're calculating now that they actually had a 6.1 savings. I don't have anything in front of me from Gita that shows that, but I'll take your word for it. So that means that they did better on their bond refinancing than they had originally predicted. So if I could just ask, how much refinancing did you account for FY22?
Yes, Senator.
Savings, refinancing savings for FY22.
The refinance savings that was provided to us by Gita total of approximately $24 million,
For
which was
FY20?
supposed to be, for FY22. The amounts that are reflected now or being mentioned now is regarding the financing savings refund of the BBT for FY21.
Yes, I know.
That savings was not part of the FY22
Yes.
calculation in the refunds,
Right,
in the tax refunds.
right. But this was discussed before. Okay, so no, I have no objection that this money is going to go into government claims. Is there any, this is FY21 savings. It's already in the general fund. Is there any assurance that this money actually exists and is available? Given the shortfalls for other,
Senator, the only assurance I have is being what's noted by Gita and saying that the savings was 6.1. And like you, I'm going to rely on their input and that savings is still available. Now, remember, of the 6.1 by law, 5 million of that actually goes to public health. So the difference between the 6.1 and the 5 million is what I would think is technically available.
All right, this was not, you were not aware of this when we were putting the budget together.
No, I was not, Senator.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Does anyone else like to speak to this amendment? Senator Shelton.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to ask OFB if he can give us a little more information about the Government Claims Fund. Perhaps, Mr. Director, a historical trend of how the Claims Act fund has been used.
Yes, Senator. I'll just go back at least 2 years, including this fiscal year, and that in FY 2019, we appropriated $250,000 in the budget for government's claim fund, and the total expenditure in FY 2019 was $104,000. In FY 2020, we appropriated in the Budget Act $250,000, but the total expenditure was only $57,000. 57 plus. And in FY21, our current tracking, we appropriated $250,000, and we are only tracking right now as far as expenditure $63,000 in the count.
So the $150,000 that has been originally put in this budget has been based on the trend that we haven't used this fund to the fullest.
That is correct, Senator.
Thank you very much.
All right. Does anyone else like to speak to this amendment? Senator Nelson?
Thank you. Steve, just to caveat on the line of questions, why hasn't, what was the last statement? Like, all the funds were not used or something like that? Sorry, I was distracted.
What I was just stating is that over the last 3 years, including FY21, they have not spent more than half of what was appropriated to the government's clean fund.
Why have they not spent more than half?
Again, that's something I guess we're probably going to have to ask the AG and find out, of all the cases that are being pending or been filed and I guess in the process of being litigated and stuff, what the final outcome of these cases will be. And I do believe Senator Terlahi mentioned there's, I believe, a $2 million outstanding or pending cases that are being filed with the AG.
I didn't mention that.
Point of information, sorry, Mr. Chair. Point of information, it was me that mentioned that. I have a letter from the Attorney General's office
All right.
stating that there's 5 pending cases,
All right.
and the total is about over $2 million.
Yeah, if awarded, it could come up to 2 million. Okay, please continue, Senator Nelson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. When they say pending cases, Steve, does that mean that the court has made a ruling on those cases?
I didn't quite get your question. Can you say it one more time?
When they say pending cases, does that mean that the court has made a ruling on those cases?
I cannot answer that, Senator. I don't know.
Is there someone that can answer that? Because then I think that would clarify a lot. If we say that the people are owed $2 million, then I will, absolutely I would support amendment to make sure to give the people what they're owed. But if the court has not decided on these cases, and the definition of pending means that the court has not decided on those cases, then what are we actually paying? So can we just, Mr. Chair, can I ask for a quick recess so we can get some clarity on this definition of what is what is the definition
All
of
right,
pending?
let's
Thank you,
take a
Mr.
quick
Chair.
recess and make some phone calls. Thank you. Committee of the Whole is called back to order. If I'm correct, your question is, could you repeat your question, Senator Nelson, just so I think I got an answer for you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yes, the question is what is the definition of pending? And so have these cases already been litigated and has the court awarded the people who are filing claims? Or is it pending because it's still at the court?
As I spoke to the AG's office in reference to the word pending, and they were very specific. Number one, pending can be construed as there was a claim, a reported claim, but not necessarily mean that it's settled. That's one. Pending could also mean that it's still in discussion. And then the same token, pending could be they're waiting for a settlement. So has not been settled. It's not at the court level yet. There's no challenge. It's still being debated and discussed by the claimant and the board. So it's up.
So
Right.
what is the amount owed in the claims that have already been decided by the court?
Oh, then that's something maybe OFB can answer. You're talking about what has been paid out so far.
What is the amount owed in claims that have been decided by the court?
Yeah, that's okay.
We are still pending a response for them. We've already contacted the AG's office for that specific information. But, like I mentioned, what we paid out thus far this fiscal year is $63,000.
And what are we currently appropriating for, so what is left of the $63,000? Because the fiscal year ends in what, a month? Is there anything that needs to be owed in this fiscal year?
That, Senator, I don't know. Again, that's an outstanding balance that the the AG's office is going to have to entertain and find out whether or not they're going to expend the entire $150 that was appropriated. I don't know what the outstanding balance is, if there is any owed for cases that have been already processed and determined.
So you have $150,000 that you set aside, and the only thing that the AG paid out was $60,000. Is that correct?
No, as far what's showing in the system, they've expended $63,000, leaving a balance of $87,000 for FY21.
For FY21, and then how much are we appropriating for FY22?
No, previous budget, but this year, 21's only 150.
How much are we appropriating for FY22 outside of this amendment?
For FY22, we're proposing $150,000.
$150,000. So we're just increasing it 60 plus 150, so that's 210. Is that the proper accounting? If the amendment, oh, I must be on the wrong amendment.
Now, if you're asking me how much was appropriated for FY22, it's $150,000. What we appropriated in FY21 was $250,000.
Oh,
Yes.
okay. So what is their balance now?
$187,000.
All right, Senator Nelson, that pretty much answer your questions?
Yeah, it does. I understand that $2 million in pending claims are claims that not have been decided by the court.
That's correct.
Okay.
All right,
So they're not owed to people because the court has not decided it.
that's correct.
Okay.
All right.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Madam Speaker, you had your hand up. Would you were going to comment?
I was just going to make a point of information that government claims, when they file them, the AG doesn't even respond for 6 months. They have 6 months to do anything, and that's probably why there's so many outstanding claims pending.
That's correct. Does anyone else like to speak, or my colleagues like to speak on this amendment? Senator Moylan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Guerrero, so in FY20, right, 250,000 was appropriated. They spent 57. So then the next fiscal year, we basically start at zero. There's nothing that rolls over into a bank account specifically for the government claims fund. It's the general fund. So every fiscal year we appropriate. So if we put, let's say, if we wanted to put $2 million into this account to possibly pay out everything in the pipeline, and it ends up maybe, it just follows the norm of a 200,000 maybe was actually paid out. So the rest of that money doesn't roll into the government claims fund the following fiscal year because it's just general fund. So basically, we're locking up the money that we could have used someplace else because it's just in the general fund. There's no other side account specifically for this. You can put $1 million if we wanted to, but I'm just concerned, and it was very helpful that you expressed to us what the trend is showing. And it's helpful also to know how long a court case takes. So there's no special fund for this. It's just a general fund. And every year, fiscal year, it's zero, and that's why we had to appropriate something at least. And you're looking at 150,000 based on your experience for the last 3 years.
That's correct, Senator.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
All right, does anyone else like to speak? If not, did you want to speak? I didn't hear an objection at all on the floor, so would you like to close? No need to close, we'll just ask for, yes, Senator Brown, you would like to speak? No. Yes, thank you. Senator Tello, are we good? And we can go ahead and, if there's no objection, you have an objection? We have one objection, so all in
I'd like to
favor?
wait.
Ma'am?
If I can close then, Mr. Chair.
Okay, you
If
want
I
to
can,
close?
just real short. I'll try and make it real short. Since
Okay, thank you,
Since there
then.
is an objection, I would like to make a closing
All
remark.
right, please.
Mr. Chair, this appropriation is only done during the budget time. We can't foresee, any claims that are being paid out from now until next year. But it's been a practice of this body to ensure that the fund is appropriated. Now, we did increase the limit of liability for this fund to 500,000. Times have changed, and by next year, we don't know if the cost of, medical insurance or medical cost or any kind of, if a car was damaged, property being more expensive. So, Mr. Chair, for many years, it's only been 250. Now, whatever's being paid out last year or the year before, we still need to make sure that this fund is replenished every year for that sake, to ensure that nobody is left with a bill that they can't even afford to pay because of an accident caused by this government of Guam. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
All right, thank you. My colleagues, there is an objection. All in favor of the amendment proffered by Senator Tello, please raise your hand. 1, 2, 3, 4. Motion passes. We are now on your second amendment, Senator Tello. I think we need to change that number, right?
No, Mr. Chair, thank you, Mr. Chair. This is just an amendment that would, it's on line 13, page 56, which it starts, Mr. Chair. And this is basically not, like we do every year with the Guam Claims Act, we allow this money to continue on. So notwithstanding any other provisions of law, the unexpended balance of the government claims fund appropriated to the Department of Administration fiscal year 2021 pursuant to Public Law 35-99 shall continue to be available to the department for the payment of approved government claims in fiscal year 2020. And this has been a common practice for years, Mr. Chair.
All right, thank you. Does anyone who would like to speak on that amendment? Are there any objection? You want to speak?
Just to clarify where
Yes.
the amendment is at, Mr. Chair,
Okay.
in the file.
If I'm correct, I think the amendment is on
Page 13?
it's on SB 55 TTT L13, page 56,
Yes.
and it's the bottom part of the page. Notwithstanding, it's basically a rollover, just to carry over whatever's left in their balance. All right? Are there any objection to that motion? One object, all in favor of the motion to roll over? I mean, for continuing appropriation? Please,
Wait, Mr. Chair, I'm sorry, is there an objection to the
there is
amendment?
there's one objection.
Okay, stand-
Okay, all, okay, everybody, all in favor of the notwithstanding the provisions? There's one objection. Please raise your hand in favor. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Motion passes. Thank you, Senator Tello. We will now proceed to the next amendment. Next amendment is Senator Nelson. It's found on,
Sorry, Mr. Chair,
yes,
this is Senator Perez.
Senator Perez,
My amendment
yes.
actually comes first.
I beg pardon?
I have an amendment that comes first.
You have amendment in where? The only amendment that's listed to follow is page 60. 56 is done.
Yeah, there is an amendment,
You
line
do have an
1 to
amendment?
27. Yeah, it should be in the drive.
Okay, let's hold on and see. When did you turn that in? If you just turned it in now, then
Yesterday.
yesterday? Okay. We'll have the clerks here look for it, because right now I don't have that. Because you do have something further on page 60, but. Are you referring to your L1 to 27, page 60?
It's labeled L1 27 to 27, page 60, L1-2, P61.
Okay, but based on the list I'm getting, it's Senator Nelson's first, as they were turned in.
But mine starts on line 1.
Well, you're going according to the line. I'm going according to how it's submitted. So I'm going to go ahead and proceed with Senator Nelson, then we'll catch up with
Point
you.
of order, Mr. Chair, I sent this in yesterday. It should have been the first one, and it's on line 1.
Okay, stand by. We'll stay on recess while we get the information. Committee of Rules is called back to order, but because we're too close to 11:30, we're going to recess until 12:30. See you at 12:30, my colleagues.